The nation of Israel had three great kings. You know them as well as I do: Saul, David, Solomon. During their reign of about 130 years, Israel was the greatest, most powerful nation in the world. In 922, Solomon died. And the nation of Israel was divided into two kingdoms. One of the kingdom, confusingly enough, was named Israel. It was the northern part of what used to be the nation. And the other part of the kingdom was the kingdom of Judah to the south. Jerusalem, that used to be the capital city of the whole nation, was located in the south, so Judah had its capital, but the northern kingdom of Israel needed to come up with its own capital, and they came up with a city that the capital name would be Samaria. And the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah coexisted for 200 years. In 722 BC, the Assyrian army invaded the northern kingdom of Israel, destroyed Samaria, and the political history of the northern kingdom of Israel ended. After a while, of course, there were intermarriages between the Assyrian soldiers and the women still living in Samaria, and the results of those intermarriages were children who became known, derogatorily speaking, as Samaritans. Those people were seen by the Jews in Judah as half-breeds, ceremonially unclean, social outcasts, religious heretics, and hatred. I mean bold-faced hatred between the Jews and the Samaritan began and built for 700 years. Then Jesus came and told us a story. A story about a man that got beaten up on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, and that's important because Luke wants us to know that this man was a Jew. Who helps him? His hated mortal enemy for 700 years. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. You know this story as well as I. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And it weakens the parable to think that the priest was a bad guy. Had the priest stopped to help him, he would have become ritually unclean and would have not been able to help the people in his own temple. What do? Help that person or those people? The man was caught between duty and duty. And a Levite, an associate priest, did the same thing. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Notice all that he did. Luke wants us to notice. He went to him and bound up his wounds, poured on oil and wine, set him on his beast, brought him to an inn, took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Take care of him. If you need more, I'll be back." Which of these three do you think proved neighbor to the man who fell among robbers? The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, "Go and do the same." It's a nice story. For those of you who picked it, thank you. It's a nice story. Too bad it doesn't happen anymore. At least not in USA Today. I've gotten a copy of USA Today every day for the last 2 weeks. Relax, this is an hour service. I'm going to only read a couple of them. Let me read you some stories that I found in these USA Today newspapers. June the 26th. There's a story in here where, there we go, rescuers recovered 10 bodies from a sunken, from a massive landslide in southwestern China. Some of you might remember that. And then there's this story, 3 people died and a bunch of other people were injured as a boat capsized near Medellin, Colombia. Remember that? And then, at least in this newspaper, there was the requisite stories about health care. I can tell you that on this one page, bold letters, Republicans lied on health care. Right next to it, failing Democrats need to do their own autopsy. USA Today, July 5th. North Korea missiles provoke United States. I suppose so. I suppose all of us ought to be provoked, and if you're not provoked, I've got a concern about why. Enfield, Connecticut. A man who was knocked over and bitten by a police dog in a training exercise filed a lawsuit against Enfield and its police department. Now you can continue the rest of your life knowing that. Pensacola, Florida, a strip club faces a lawsuit for allegedly hiring only women bartenders. Kauai, Hawaii. I'm not making this stuff up, folks. Kauai, Hawaii, a dead boa constrictor was found in a nature preserve. You feel better, Barb? No. Yeah. Ballston, New York. This is a good one. Ballston, New York. A man who stopped at a convenience store to put air in his tires ended up buying a lottery ticket that won him $1 million. I think where's Richard? I'd like to rent a van, Richard, and some of us go to Ballston, New York. Warwick, Rhode Island. The Rhode Island transportation officials stopped a flatbed truck on I-95 saying it's too heavy for state bridges. This is a national newspaper. And then my favorite, anybody here born in West Virginia? I wouldn't say so either, but Princeton, West Virginia, a tractor trailer hauling 2,300 pigs overturned on Interstate 77. Aren't you glad you came to worship today to learn these things? Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that I read every single USA Today, cover to cover, for the last 2 weeks, and I found not one, ladies and gentlemen, not one story that was anywhere close to the story that Jesus told. Not one. Not willing to give up, I went online. Typed in present-day Samaritan stories, I found some. 29-year-old Victor Perez heard on the radio that a young girl had been abducted, happened to see a truck matching the description of the kidnapper's vehicle. Victor Perez got into his own vehicle, got to the car, screamed at the kidnappers over and over until they pushed the girl out of the truck. He stopped his car and stayed with the girl till the police came. Never met the girl before in his life. 50-year-old Wesley Autry taking his daughters to the, this blows my mind, you listening? Taking his daughters to school on Sunday, fellow passenger on the train, on the subway, fellow passenger had a seizure, fell off the platform and landed between the two rails. Autry jumped to the man, pushed him as deep into the ground as he could, just as an oncoming train passed over both men. Both men survived. somebody named Horia Cretan raced into a burning building to save a 4-year-old boy whom he had never met. Last one. Some of you might remember this name. Sharon and I were in Washington, D.C. when this happened. Larry Stutnick. Remember that name? If you don't, you remember Air Florida Flight 90? That some years ago crashed into the Potomac River? Lenny Skulnick jumped into the icy river and saved a drowning woman. Apparently, the Samaritan is still alive. Apparently, stories of Jesus being disguised as Samaritans still exist. Apparently, on the road of life, people still care. Can I ask you a question? Have you ever been on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho? Have you ever been beaten up and cared for by, of all people, a Samaritan? Have you ever been the Samaritan that cared for somebody else when nobody else would stop? I think that the answer to all of those questions is yes. I think the kind of stories that Jesus told are being lived out through common, ordinary people like us all across this world. Now, maybe USA Today isn't telling those stories, so maybe that's our responsibility. Maybe it's our high and holy calling, your calling and my calling, is to tell the stories of Samaritans to people out there, how God has used us to be Samaritans and has brought Samaritans in our lives. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it's absolutely critical to think that if we don't tell those stories, that there are an awful lot of people out there who think those stories don't exist. And that is tragic. Pastor Stephen, in his wonderful sermon last week, gave you one thing to do this past week. I'm going to give you 3. Number 1, all of you got a sticker when you came in this morning. What I want you to do after the sermon and during the next hymn is I want you to put one name, that's all, the first name on this sticker of a person who you have been the Samaritan for, or a person who has been the Samaritan for you. And during the singing of the next song, what I want you to do is I want you to come forward. I'm going to move this number down here. I want you to put the name on the number. Number 2, on Wednesday evening, we've been getting together to tell stories. I want to invite every single person in the room this coming Wednesday at 7 o'clock to meet us in the gathering room to tell stories of how the Samaritan is alive. And 3, once this week, not 5 times, not 12 to the third power, once this week, I want every single one of us in this room to answer Jesus' call to go and do likewise. To be a Samaritan for somebody else as God has been for us. Because I believe with all my heart that when people like us tell those stories and live out those stories of being Samaritans and caring as Samaritans, that this angry, hating, vitriolic world becomes a little gentler, a little kinder, a little more loving place in which to live. I believe that with all my heart. I hope you do too.